Hello everyone, Dalton Perrine here, and today I'm going to begin working on fixing my rapid rating on chess.com, and I thought during the process I would go ahead and make some videos documenting the games that I'm playing as I kind of fix my rapid rating. Sorry for the interruption in the video, just adding a little cut in here. It's obviously recorded at a different time, but if you would like to fast forward through the explanation as to why my rating is lower than it normally would be, if you don't really care about the explanation too much, that's perfectly fine. You're just going to want to skip to about the 7-minute mark, maybe the 7-minute and 15-minute mark or so on the video. Okay, enjoy. Now, the rating right now is legitimately 1538 rating. Now, that looks really low for the level that I'm at, but there is a bit of a reason behind this, which I'll explain here. So this isn't a second account or a Smurf account or anything like that. This is legitimately my main account. But let me just kind of explain why it has such a low rapid rating here. So if we go to the kind of rating profile here, once again, legitimately 1538 at this point. And if we can see that I haven't played a rapid game in quite a while. Most of the time on chess.com I'm playing Blitz or Bullet or something like that. But if we go back to all time, we can see that, first of all, my highest rating was 2261, which is, I'm perfectly fine with that kind of rating there. But we can see on the graph here from all time that, starts off kind of low, spikes up to 2200, stays about 2200 for a long time. And then we can see there's a very big drop with one day here going from 2144 to 1538. So you might wonder, okay, how do you lose 600 points in one day? Well, the reason behind that is that really all the games I've played, all the rapid games I've played on chess.com have all been simuls. So I work for Chess University on the side, and I've done a lot of simuls for Chess University. And it was on this particular day. This ended up being, I think it was March 11th. Actually, let's click on the game archive here. March 11th, we can see here is kind of the last day that I did a simul. It's been a little while, but last day I did a simul. And we can see here at the start of the day, just prior to March 11th, we can see, May 15th, which was, the previous year. We can see my rating was at 2144. And then on March 11th, we have a couple of wins there on the simul for that day. We can see that they're all the same exact time control, 40 minutes with 20-second increment. But we can also see there's quite a lot of losses, especially a lot of losses right here in a row. And it's not just because it was a simul that I played bad chess or anything like that. But here on chess.com, I wasn't doing something correct with the interface, but I ended up losing like all of these games on time. And not because, again, I'm playing too slow for a simul or anything like that, but sometimes when you make a move in a simul, it won't send you to the next game that you have the lowest amount of time on. It'll send you to a different game, but you might end up having to almost manually search for certain games if it's not sending you to them automatically. So we can see here, this particular game I lost. It's a 10-move game, but for instance, the last move in the position ends up being black playing the move bishop from c8 to a6 here, and I lose. And again, it's not that I'm losing the game. This is a perfectly fine position for me as white. But I'm sorry, I have to kind of fix there we go, I have to fix that a little bit. But yeah, the last move of the game was bishop c8 to a6, and I end up losing the game, but it's because it's on time. The interface hadn't found the game, or I never really got around to seeing this game again. And I was playing a lot of games that particular day during the simul, and this is just one example of losing, a game that I'm definitely not losing the game here. So I lost this one on time. Let me go back here and, all these other games here, a 12-move game, a 24-move game, 34 and 24, some of these maybe I, might have legitimately lost one or two of these or something like that. And then I do win, quite a few of the other ones. But we can see here, especially because these were rated simul games, that the difference in rating is pretty drastic. You would see here I would have been like 2162 playing against an 1848 rated player on this particular game, playing against a 1300 rated player on this game, a 1700 on this game, 1300, 1600. And when you lose games at that point, especially when you haven't played games for a long time, you're not just losing, 8 to 10 or even 14 points per game. We're seeing that I'm losing about 100 points per game. So when you combine a couple of losses in a row with the the jump, or kind of, I guess in this case, the drop in rating being pretty drastic with a loss or a win and stuff like that. It does contribute to, if I lose a couple of games, or in this case, 6 games in a row on time because the interface couldn't find the games, then I'm losing 100 points per game. There's 600 points right there, for example. So, like I said, I'm going to try to work on fixing this rating. If we go back to the real, chess.com here. So this isn't like I said earlier, this isn't like a second account. This isn't, me trying to boost a rating or raise a rating necessarily from, a second account that doesn't really matter. This is legitimately my main account, and I just want to, I want to get it up to a rating that's, something that I'd be happier with. So the way I'm going to do that is playing a series of 15-minute with 10-second increment games. And I figured instead of just playing them, without the recording, instead of just playing them on my own, I might as well explain what I'm doing along the way, because a lot of people, I think, would find something like this useful. So I'm going to go ahead and search for a game, and let's see who we can come up with. So I'm going to try to do the game series. I probably will be gaining somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 points per game or something like that, just because this isn't an account that has a ton of games on it. If we went back to the other one, you could see that I played, I think it's 70, yeah, it shows a total of 71 games. So it's not a lot of games played on this account necessarily, which means that the losses and gains in rating will still be fairly drastic, but instead of them being simul games where I may be losing on time because the interface doesn't change things around, I'm going to be, playing these games and working my best to win them. So I'm going to try to look for, I'm not going to try to necessarily play as tough of opponents as possible to automatically win just, 4 or 5 games and maybe get my rating back to 2,000 or something like that. I'm going to try to play players, progressively up the rating category, so to speak. I'm going to try to see if I can search for some games that are maybe in the 11 to 1,200 rating range first, and then progressively get more difficult as the games go along. And again, the whole purpose behind me kind of recording this is just to provide some educational commentary on the games. Okay, so let's go ahead and look for some games, and let's see what we can get here. Okay, we got the first game pretty quick, actually. This one ends up being against a 1,500 rated player. I'm going to see also if I can get, like I said, get some low rated games, but we'll start with this first one. We're playing against CalRox 28, and their rating's 1540. So it does show that I'm going to gain about 80 rating points if I win this game. So I'm going to start off with knight f3, d5, and I'm going to go for c4. This is kind of my main opening repertoire at this point in my chess playing career. I'm going for this kind of ready system, knight f3 and c4. They play c6, which is very solid, keeping the d5 pawn protected. And I'm going to continue with g3 here. I'm going to work to play bishop to g2, castle, probably play things like d4 pretty soon, and try to get a space advantage. Black here plays the move e6. This is a very solid response to what I'm doing here. The main downside, though, is that the bishop on c8 is very much blocked in. So what I'm going to do, actually, I could go bishop g2 right away, but there might be some ideas of black taking the pawn, and, he might be able to hold on to the pawn for a little bit. I think I will actually play bishop g2, but I may follow this up with b3, bishop b2, castle, d4, something like that pretty soon. So after knight f6, let's continue with b3. There's nothing wrong with playing something like d4 here. That would transpose into more what's known as the Catalan type of system. Black goes knight to d7. I'll go bishop b2. I'm going to castle, and I'll have to figure out where I'm going to put the knight. A lot of times it'll go to c3, but there are also cases where you could play d3 and knight to d2. That way you're not blocking the bishop on b2. So black goes ahead and plays bishop d6. He might be trying to play the move e5 at some point. So for that reason, I could go ahead and just play d4 myself, just to gain a little bit of space in the center, prevent the opponent from playing e5. It does block the bishop in. That's a slight downside. I could also allow black to play e5 and then work towards playing against black's center advantage that they're going to have there. Maybe things like trading the pawns, knight c3, knight b5 ideas. So I have a little bit of flexibility with this type of opening system. I think for the purpose of this kind of game in this video, I'm actually going to allow black to have a space advantage, and we're going to see if we can kind of play against that. And this is, again, assuming that black might play e5. So I'm actually going to castle here. If black plays e5, that would be fine. They're not playing e5 yet. Again, like I said earlier, d4 would be perfectly playable here. I'm actually still going to allow this e5 move, though. Again, just to see how we might be able to play against an opponent who does end up with more space. So I'm going to go d3. Probably lean towards something like knight c3, rook c1. I might work towards a queenside pawn expansion, a3 and b4, especially because this is kind of the side of the board where I have a little bit more space than black. So I do think, though, like from a general perspective, black probably should work towards playing just playing e5 here. Just take the space advantage in the center that they're given. Other options here. Okay, so black goes for b6, which is playable. Looking to put the bishop on b7, maybe ideas of c5 could be to open the bishop up a little bit. I think I am going to continue with knight to d2, rook to c1, and look to maybe aim towards the queen side here. Other ideas are, with knight to d2, I might play, instead of d4, I might play the move e4. So trying to still gain space in the center, but without restricting the b2 bishop. In that case, if I played e4, I would restrict the g2 bishop, but if you want to push one of the pawns, you're going to have to block one of the bishops here. So I'm going to go for knight d2, though. Black plays a5, so that's a little bit of an odd move to me. Mainly because I don't know if black maybe wants to play a4. I mean, maybe that's an idea. So I think for that kind of reason, I've kind of, held off long enough on the center. I was going to, if black had played e5, I was going to kind of focus on what to do if they have the space advantage. But I think I'm just going to go ahead and grab the space in the center myself. I'm going to go e4 at this point. The nice thing with e4 in comparison to d4 is that now I have ideas of e5, forking the bishop and the knight. I'm also putting a little bit more pressure on the center. And a lot of times that's something that white wants to try to do in this opening, put a lot of pressure on the d5 pawn. So probably black's best bet is to do something like maybe queen c7, maybe again e5, or in this case they trade the pawns, which I think is okay. Now if I take back with the pawn, my knight on d2 will have, be in a little bit of an odd position, I'd say. If I take there, I don't know really where the knight's going forward from there. I guess if I could take and push, and then play knight e4 at some point, it could be pretty good. If I take and they play something like e5, though, then, I'm kind of getting shut down a little bit. So if I take with the knight instead, and they do end up trading, then my knight won't be on d2, and I'll be opening up towards the bishop, and this knight won't be kind of stuck in place there. The other thing is, if this trade happens, my bishop is opened up a bit more because of the diagonal there. So I think I'm going to use the knight. I do think taking with the pawn would be fine. Even a move like knight to d4 is kind of interesting here. Not even taking the pawn back and aiming towards the c6 pawn might even be an idea in some situations. But I think I'm going to take with the knight. Taking with the pawn is good too, though. I mean, really, I think both are okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to take with the knight. So let's take with the knight here. If I had taken with the pawn, the last thing I was kind of thinking about was, again, if black plays e5, the knight's a little stuck. So I figured let's just get rid of the kind of redundant piece on d2. So they take, we take back. We are opening up a discovered attack on the bishop, so black needs to answer this threat first. I might also play e5 and open up this bishop, gain a little bit of a kingside space advantage, and probably work towards playing on the probably the king side a little bit more than the queen side, I would say, if I get to play e5 here. If black plays queen c7, I can't play e5. E5, I guess you could do take. You do a bunch of trades and pick up c6 with the bishop on g2, so it would be even. But I don't know if that necessarily does too much for me. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm looking at either rook e1 and e5. Rook e1, bishop b4 is fairly annoying. So maybe I could do queen e2 and e5. That's also an idea. I think we'll go for that then. We'll go queen e2. Probably put the rooks on e1 and d1. I don't know if c1 is that useful right now. I would like to push the e5 pawn and have one of the rooks on the d file. So I don't know if I just didn't want to go rook e1 yet because bishop b4 just kind of, what do you do with the rook after bishop b4? Do you go to e2 or e3? I guess you could. It's just a little bit awkward. So let's go for queen e2. e5 is still what I want to do at some point here. And if black plays e5 themselves, they're creating a weakness on this f5 square. I might be able to play knight h4 and knight f5. Now, probably black's plan should be something like... I do think e5 would be fine. Then maybe putting the bishop on e6 or something like that. The downside for black's position is that he's just behind on space, especially in the center. But if black would play something like e5, okay, which they do play here, maybe the knight could work to c5, maybe even e6 and go into d4 one day. That might be an idea that's available. I could go knight h4, knight f5 right away. Knight h4, if they play like g6, then I can maybe take advantage of the king being a bit weak. Knight h4, f4 sometimes is an idea as well. But I think I'm going to put the... Black might also work for playing a4 here, which I think would be a fairly annoying move. Especially if I play something like rook to d1, a4. They might trade and open up the a file for the rook. I don't know if I really want to play a3 to slow that down, though, because then knight c5, kind of pokes around on the queen side a bit. So I think I am actually going to go straight ahead with my idea toward the king side. I might go knight h4 right away. Even a move like bishop h3 might have some reason behind it, because if the knight moves, I can trade bishops, and then I'll be left with a... I'll get rid of my bad bishop that's on g2, and he'll be left with the bishop on d6, which is not that great. But a slight downside with that is that the more pieces I end up trading, the less my space advantage matters. So generally speaking, when you have more space than your opponent, you want to try to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. So for that reason, I'm going to stick with the knight h4 idea. Knight f5 is just a nice improvement of the piece. Even if this knight moves and the bishop is there to defend it, I still might play knight f5 anyways, because if the trade occurs, then my bishop on g2 is opened up. And I also gain some pawns on the king side to start pushing up the board for some attacking ideas. So maybe black should play knight c5. I'd go knight f5. Another idea here is to maybe move the rook, knight f5, bishop f8. And then play g6. That way the bishop is protecting the king a bit. That might also be a reasonable way for for black to continue here. So he plays knight f6 instead of knight c5. I think that the knight would have been a bit better placed on c5, mainly because it helps with some queenside play, a4 ideas at some point to hit b3. It also helps with the idea of going to e6 and then going into d4 at some point. I'm not a big fan of the knight being on f6 for black because you're not really going forward from here. You can't, going to g4 will just get kicked away. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of the knight there is doing. It's not really working with black's queenside plan, I think. So the question is, do I go knight f5 right away, which I'm actually relatively okay with? Or do I play maybe rook d1 or something like that first? I am a little bit more okay with playing something like a3 here and now, because if black plays a4, I go b4 and try to kind of prevent the pawn trades on the queen side. And I'm more okay with that because there's no knight c5 move to hit the b3 pawn. So this is now an idea I might look at. Maybe going to f5 also is just fine. There might be an exchange, and then I could maybe play queen f3 to attack the c6 pawn at some point. Rook e1 also attacking e5 at some point. So I think it's a good situation here to just kind of push forward with our own plan. I don't know if we necessarily need to react to black's a4 idea. So I think I am just going to go knight f5 here. If black tried some kind of tactic of like taking the knight and then, taking the pawn then the knight, it wouldn't work out because I would just take back and protect the knight. So black does take my knight, I take back. I do end up with doubled pawns, which is a slight downside here. But the main benefit is I have the bishop pair, and both of my bishops are pretty nicely opened here. Now, from black's perspective, again, I'm not a big fan of rook c8 using the a8 rook, because this makes his a4 idea less appealing. So he seems like he's playing a bit passively. He's not really, he's protecting this. He's probably going to have to protect this pretty soon once I play rook e1. He's not playing particularly active at this point. So I'm going to continue with rook e1 here, just to put pressure on the pawn there, threatening to take it. He'll probably play rook e8, protecting it. And then I do have to watch out for bishop b4. If he goes rook e8 and I go rook d1, bishop b4 is still a little moderately annoying. So maybe I will play a3 at some point. But I'm going to follow up with playing rook d1. Probably looking to play something like g4, g5 at some point, trying to kick the knight around. I can't play things like f4 yet because he'll take and the rook is hitting the queen, and the rook is protected on e8. So, so I think I'm going to do... I could even go bishop c3, trying to prevent bishop b4. That's not too bad of an idea either. I would kind of like to kick the knight and play a move like bishop e4, f6, and continue attacking over there. I definitely do have the space advantage with the pawn, so playing in that direction does make sense. I think because bishop b4 is moderately annoying enough, I think I am going to just play a3 here real quick. Keep the bishop off of b4. Now I don't have to really worry about playing moves like, I don't have to worry about the bishop hitting the rook. And I'll probably play rook d1, queen f3, look to kind of poke around at the pawn weaknesses and the bishop that's only protected once. Also, probably again, like I said, g4, g5 at some point down the road here. Okay, so queen to d7. It is attacking my pawn, but I don't really have to react to this because I can simply play rook to d1, and I can just pin the bishop. Now, a slight downside of rook d1 is that after a move like queen e7, this pawn will be hit, and I'll have to kind of figure out how to deal with that idea. But even if this pawn is captured, I'll be able to pick up e5. So I don't know if that's necessarily a problem for us. So let's continue with rook d1. That was kind of our idea in the first place. If the queen goes to e7, they definitely can't take the pawn because I'll take the bishop here. If they go to e7, I'm not actually too worried about this because I'll be able to trade off my a pawn for the e pawn, which is a good trade of pawns for white here. I'm trading off kind of a side pawn for a central pawn. And also, the more pawns that are traded, the more the position opens up, the happier my bishops are going to be. So black has to kind of figure out this issue here. I think threatening maybe to play bishop takes e5 due to the pin here. So that's something maybe black has to be a bit careful about. Bishop takes. I guess it wouldn't work though, actually, because the rook takes, queen takes, bishop takes, take on d7, knight takes. I would actually end up losing a piece if I did that. So I'm not threatening this just yet. But, if I move the queen, then bishop takes would be an idea. So if black plays something like rook to d8, he'll no longer be protecting this pawn. So I might play queen f3 there to poke the c6 pawn again. Queen f3 would also protect the f5 pawn, which is nice. So I think we have at least a little bit of an advantage here. More space, bishop pair. The only real downside I'd say is the doubled pawns. But we can, I think we can play queen f3 here. We threaten this pawn as well as taking the e5 pawn due to the pin. So queen f3 is looking pretty good. Black might try e5 to block my queen out and hit and attack it. But then after that, I can move my queen away maybe to e3 or something. Threaten b6, and then also be having ideas of taking the knight on f6, which could be a bit weak. So queen f3, e4, Queen e3, he might take this pawn, I take on b6. It could get a little messy. Queen f3, e4. Yeah, so e4 is actually a little messier than I'd like it to be, because then maybe the queen does take on f5 after that. Queen takes f5 is not really an issue right now, because I'll be able to take c6. But, you know, e4 after queen f3, and then taking f5 would technically work out. So I think I'm going to... what are we going to do here? I could play queen e3 first, just to see what they do about this pawn. C5 is a pawn sacrifice. If the pawn takes back, then I could play maybe... you know, black would have some doubled pawns there and some weaknesses I might be able to take advantage of. But I don't know if I have a concrete follow-up there. I could play queen a6 and attack c6 and a5, but I don't know if that's anything too special. It might be okay, though. c5, pawn takes queen a6. Threatening bishop takes c6 ideas. And also just taking back on a5. Queen f3, e4 is still kind of the issue here a bit. I think I am actually going to go for this idea. So this is a pawn sacrifice. After the pawn takes, though, I'm going to play queen a6, attacking both the c6 and a5 pawns. And my goal with this sacrifice is that I'm essentially going to trade pawns. Once I go to a6, there's not a good way to protect both of these. The bishop also needs some protection. And we're going to be able... we're threatening quite a few things. We're threatening all of these things at this point. So how does black deal with all three? If they take on f5, I'll play bishop takes c6, hitting the rook. The rook is going to have to go to f8 or something. I guess it could go to a7 maybe, or e7, but I can always pick up a5. So I think black's having a little bit of a tough time protecting everything, but technically at the moment they are up a pawn. If they try a move like e4, I always have the option of taking the knight and messing up the pawn structure and then taking back on e4. Again, a5, you know, all three of these pawns being attacked here. They do take on f5, okay. I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm going to take on c6 first because it comes with the threat. Always nice to make moves with threats here. Yeah, we'll take here first. If black plays something like knight g4, I can always just play f3 if I need to. f3 is protected by the bishop. I'd be threatening the knight and the rook, and black can't really protect both at the same time. So if the rook goes to e7, I can then play queen takes a5 attacking the other rook, and then I'll be actually back even in material at that point. And black's going to have some kind of tactical weaknesses on d6 and d8. If the rook goes to f8, that way the rook on d8 is protected. I, again, probably will still just take the a5 pawn. If the rook goes to e6, I think, again, I'll probably just take a5 and hit the rook on d8. So at the moment, black is still up a pawn, but we're going to get the pawn back pretty soon, and black will have the his own isolated pawn that's going to be weak. His bishop on d6 is pretty bad. So I think we've kind of exchanged a couple pawns, which is definitely one of our key plans when we have the bishop pair. We've gotten rid of our doubled f pawn, and especially once we get the pawn back on a5, we're going to probably have the better position. Now, we do give black now the space advantage in the center with the e5 and c5 pawns, but the downside is they're also weaknesses at the same time. So rook does need to move. Knight d7 doesn't work because of rook takes d8, I think. Or, sorry, rook takes d6 looks pretty good. So it's either e7, e6, or f8. I don't really see a counter-attacking move. Okay, goes to f8. This is a bit passive for sure, but it does at least keep the rook on d8 protected. I also have some ideas of if my bishop wasn't on c6, I'd be able to take the bishop on d6. But I don't really see a special place to move this to. I can't play bishop e4 because the knight will just take it. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just take the pawn back. And then I'll have more tactic ideas of maybe like bishop takes e5 due to this this pin on the d file. So that's what I'm leaning towards here. So I think I am just gonna take the pawn. I think that was my my main idea in the first place. So the threat at the moment might be bishop takes e5, or even rook takes e5. Rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes, maybe. Something like that might be a possibility. Though in that specific spot, they could take on b2. So maybe it is bishop takes e5, bishop takes, rook takes d8, which would put us up the exchange. So even on material, open position, black's got an isolated c-pawn. The rook's what's called a critical square, one attacker, one defender. d6 is critical, one attacker, one defender. Black now is trying to attack us on f2. We need to answer this, pretty quickly. Something like rook e2 or d2 seems a bit on the passive side of things. Plus, black could play queen h5 to keep attacking us. So like I mentioned earlier, I think I have the move f3 here. f3 is defended by the bishop on c6. We just want to kick the knight off of g4. The knight's going to retreat, and then we can play maybe bishop takes e5 or, maybe figure something out at that point. Sacrifices don't do anything. We cover all the other squares of the knight. We'll just take it if it goes one there. There's no bishop c5 check. Even if this pawn wasn't here, our queen's protecting that. Queen to c2. Okay, so I hadn't really considered this move, but there is a problem with this move. Black does have threats of mate on f2, or it will be mate soon on h2 and f2. If he goes to f2 and then to h2, or h2 then to f2 is mate. So I could simply take the knight, but his other idea is to take my bishop on b2. So the problem, though, and the issue that ends up being here in this case for black is that I can play the move rook to d2 or queen to d2. Rook to d2 is just going to be clearly superior because I'm hitting the queen, and I'm also protecting the bishop. Once the queen moves away, I'll take the knight on g4. If I had done queen to d2, he could trade and then move the knight. So that queen d2 wouldn't work, but rook d2 looks pretty good. He'll be able to take the pawn on f3 or on b3, but then I'll still take the I'll still end up taking the knight, and I'm just up a piece in this position. It is a little awkward. We have to be a little careful about some c5, bishop c4, bishop c5 ideas, but I think if they go c4, I'll probably just play something like queen to c3 or bishop to d5 or something like that. c5, I do also have rook takes and then queen takes e5 ideas. But then rook g6, I guess, defends the mate. So either way, though, we're up a piece. We're down a pawn, but up a piece, which obviously is pretty good for us. And I think we're doing pretty good here. If this bishop moves, I also have rook takes d8 ideas. Bishop d5. I could have even played bishop d5 if I wanted to just throw that in here, but taking the knight looks fine enough. So I don't know exactly what black's counterplay would be. I think his best bet is to play something like c4 with the idea of bishop c5 maybe, because I can't take the bishop on c5 with rook takes d2. My queen is getting overloaded there a little bit. But if he goes c4, I'll probably just do... I might even just double the rooks, actually. I could just play rook to d1. Then if he checks, I could just take it for free. I guess, though, c4, rook to d1, queen e3 check. That could be a little annoying. Though king g2 looks fine. c4. I can't do... okay. Yeah, I was saying, so c4... If he played c4, I actually can't do queen to c3 because he has queen to b6 check, hitting the king and the bishop. I think I was mentioning queen c3 earlier. So I think c4 was maybe the best attempt to be a bit tricky, but rook to c8 I don't think is too good. It is attacking the bishop. However, it is undefending the bishop on d6. If I take on d6, he'll take on b2. He'll get some, he'll trade pieces essentially. But keep in mind, I'm up a piece, so I'm not really unhappy with trading necessarily. I could also just play bishop takes e5 maybe. Bishop to d5 right here might be fine. I think I am, though, just going to trade because the less pieces on the board, the more, simplified the game is, and that just tends to be better for the player who's ahead. So we're just going to take here. He's going to take on b2. I'm going to take on c5 probably just to win an additional pawn. One of the only ways I can really lose this game is somehow blundering something or letting black push this pawn too far down the board and promote it. So sometimes when you're in a completely winning position, a key is to figure out, okay, how could I lose? What's like the reasonable options what counterplay does the opponent have? So I'm going to take the pawn, just double checking that there's no like checks or any tactics I'm walking into, but we pick up the pawn. Probably can also pick this pawn up. Might also start pushing the a pawn down the board and try to promote that. And yeah, we're just simply up a piece. It is a pin piece, but it is a extra piece nonetheless. So just going to work on kind of converting from here. They play e4. That's actually a little bit of a sneaky move here, because if I play, first of all, bishop takes e4, I lose the queen. If I play rook takes e4, he actually has queen b1 check. I move the king somewhere, and then queen takes e4 due to the bishop being pinned. So that's, like I said, that's a little sneaky move for sure. I want to get out of this pin. It's fairly annoying. What I'm going to do is try to offer a queen trade because, generally speaking, trading queens is good when you're ahead. I'm going to go for queen b4. This also makes sure that all my pieces are defended. There's no checks at the moment that I see. I'm also adding another attacker to the pawn, so if he doesn't trade queens, I could play queen takes e4 maybe. So just trying to keep everything safe here, especially when you're ahead, when you're winning or ahead quite a bit. You want to just try to play as safe as you can. Try to negate the opponent's counterplay. Don't allow them to have any, traps that you fall into or tactics that you don't see. Just keep it simple. Don't need to do anything crazy. I'm just going to try to trade queens. Probably try to trade rooks pretty soon, if I get the opportunity. Try to win this pawn, so then I'm going to be up a bishop and a pawn. So no need to do anything fancy. Just keep it, just keep it simple. If the queen goes to c2, I'll probably just play queen takes e4 or bishop takes e4. If the queen goes to e5, I will not play queen takes e4 there, because then I'd be losing the protection of the rook on d6. But if he goes to e5, I'll probably just play rook takes e4. So again, just win the pawn. Don't do anything silly. We should be pretty good here. We also have to keep our eye on the clock here, because we do have only 2 minutes left. Not a ton of time left at this point, but with the 10-second increment, these are 15-minute with 10-second increment games. With the increment, it makes it pretty hard to lose on time if we, as long as we play, a move every 10 seconds essentially. So I think, though, from black's perspective, it's really important to keep the queens on the board. If black does make this trade, it simplifies my life a whole lot. Because without the queens, I don't have to worry about the queen giving a check or forking pieces. So it's really important when you're behind on material that you try to keep things on the board. So something like well, right as I say that, they trade queens, but probably something like queen e5 or queen c2. Those are really some of the only safe squares for the queen to move to, but I think black really should just keep the queens on the board. Now I simply take back. Now I'm going to march the pawn up the board, pick up e4 pretty soon, and black's just going to get ground down at this point. Due to time, I'm going to try to play a little bit quicker near the end here. Really, the plan is pretty straightforward, though, like I said. So we'll just try to convert this here. I know the videos, generally speaking, the 15-minute, 10-second increment games are going to be on the longer side of things, so the videos are going to be a little bit longer, of course. But hopefully you guys don't mind that and get to kind of enjoy the commentary during the games. So probably black, I don't know, maybe black could play rook b8. I'd probably just play b5 and start pushing the pawn. It would be nice for black if they could play f5 to keep this pawn defended, but if they play f5, I'm just going to go ahead and take it with my g-pawn. So they play g6, which is not a bad idea. If I push the pawn, for example, maybe they'll play f5 to protect the pawn here. I'm going to go ahead and just take the pawn, though. Might as well get the pawn back, activate the rook, maybe go to the 7th rank if they play f5. If they push this f-pawn, we'll have ideas of both the rooks on the 7th rank, bishop d5 check, and rook takes h7 mate if the pawn moves. And there's not a whole lot black can do to stop it. Black does play rook c7, so black prevents the rooks from getting the 7th rank, but I'm just going to go ahead and push the pawn here. I could also play g5 if I wanted to just completely rule out any of the pawns moving forward, but I think pushing this pawn and just getting it down the board is going to be good enough at this point. If they go f5, okay, they play rook b8. I could also just play rook e8 check to just trade a pair of rooks. That's also completely winning. Might as well just do that here. We'll just force the trade of rooks. And then just, again, push the b pawn down the board. He might get a couple checks, but I'll just kind of tuck the king over on h3, or I might even run the king over towards the pawn. But I think we can just keep the king away from the checks, and I think the rook, bishop, and pawn can win the game on their own. So no need to even let him, pick up an h2 pawn at some point. Might as well just, work towards pushing the pawn. Okay, so we won the game. Pick up about 80 rating points there, so in the 1600 range at this point. Let's go ahead and analyze this game a little bit more. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so you're playing white in this game. I think for the most part, I think my opponent played pretty well overall. I think his opening play was a little bit on the passive side of things. A lot of times, a more normal move in the opening here is to play something like knight f6, bishop f5, or bishop g4, then play the move e6. The main difference being that once the bishop is, once the bishop's developed, then the e6 move doesn't block the bishop in. And as we saw in the game, that bishop was, not doing a ton all the way up until it traded off for the knight that was on f5. So e6 is a little bit passive, but still completely playable. Nothing inherently wrong with it, I would say. Not too much. So we just kind of develop. We protect our pawn. Like I said, there's many different options here. We could play d4, which is more of a Catalan type of system. We could play, we could castle right away. That'd be fine too. I go for b3, just to kind of, work on the double fianchetto here. Black develops, we develop bishop d6. Once again, d4 is, maybe if I really was, trying to play the most optimal moves and not, teach too much, I guess, from it, I might have played d4 to prevent the e5 move. But I almost kind of wanted black to play e5 because I thought it would be kind of an interesting topic for the game. What do we do when an opponent has the space advantage? How do we play against it? But this particular opponent did not play e5, even though I do think that's probably the way for black to go. If they played e5, I'd probably just go ahead and play something like, again, maybe d3, knight to c3 or d2, play e4, maybe take the pawn and play knight b5. That's at least, the direction I would have probably taken the game. And black might be a little bit better just because of the extra space, but overall, it's still a pretty balanced game here. That didn't happen in the game, though. Black castled. I played d3. Again, e5 is still good to play here, but black played b6 instead. And we go ahead and go knight to d2. Then a5 also we saw wasn't, a particularly great move here. And we go ahead and play e4. So just looking to gain space in the center. Other moves that are playable here, I could even go knight to d4, look to pressure the pawn. Black might go bishop to b7, maybe now rook to c1 with ideas of taking here and opening up the c file, maybe ideas of e4. Something like that would be playable. If black plays c5 or e5, I can move the knight away and hit the bishop. So that might have also been another option, but mainly because black hadn't put the pawn on e5, I decided just to play e4, and they take the pawn. I end up taking back with the knight. If I had taken back with the pawn here, like I said, this knight kind of is lacking on good squares to go to, especially if black plays e5. The knight's not really doing a whole lot on this square. So for that reason, I use the knight to take back. If he trades knights like he did, and then he plays e5 at some point, then there's no knight on d2 that's stuck doing not much. So if he hadn't taken my knight, if he had played like bishop e7 instead, then I might have done something like, maybe I would have kept the knight on the board at this point. Maybe I actually would have retreated the knight, then played d4 myself, because again, you don't want to trade too many pieces if you're ahead on space. So if black hadn't taken the chance to do the trade, I would have moved the knight to a more useful square, kept it on the board, played d4, and this would be a pretty pleasant position for me. Extra space, probably work on putting the rooks in the center, knight e5 at some point, and probably with my extra space, I'd work towards the kingside attack later on. So black did make the trade, which is probably the best idea. Queen to c7, I think, was a fine move to protect the bishop. Queen e2. Black plays e5, preventing my my e5 move. So then I played knight h4. Rook to d1 right away would have probably been fine as well. That might have also been an option, but I went for knight h4. Knight f6, knight f5. Black does make the exchange. Maybe black could have played something like bishop c5 and kept the bishop on the board instead. But then if that had happened, I'd probably play something along the lines of rook d1, king h1, and f4, and then look to aim towards the king side here. That would have probably been the general idea at this point. So instead, black did take it. Played the move rook to c8. We did rook to e1, attacking the pawn. Black plays rook e8, protecting it. And then we played a3 just to stop the bishop b4 annoyances. Queen to d7, and we did rook to d1 to pin the bishop. So now black can't take the bishop, or can't take the pawn there. Black played rook to d8, and this is where we went for c5. I don't know if c5 is necessarily the best idea. I think it works out in the game, but maybe playing something like g4 and just keeping the pawn protected is also just maybe a more in the correct direction of the board, I might say. This is kind of, again, the side of the board I have extra space on. Maybe ideas of doing this is still the better way to do things. Especially now that I look at it more, I'm threatening g5, trapping the knight right away. And black's already having to figure out how to deal with that. If they go h6, I go h4. If the knight's forced back to the h7 square, I mean, that's definitely not an ideal situation here. So I think that g4 would have also been good, but I think c5 works too. Pawn takes, queen a6. Like I said, we're just attacking all the weaknesses here. Black does pick up f5. We take on c6. The rook goes to f8. We take back on a5. Essentially, we've used a sequence of forcing moves in order to not win material, but we've gained a positional advantage. I think white's got the better position here. Black's got isolated pawns, a bad bishop, different things like that. So this is where black tried to move knight g4. We do play f3. And then queen to c2 is a good idea. This is actually a move I didn't really consider during the game, so that's kind of on me. I should have thought about this. Fortunately, it doesn't work because of rook d2, and then we're going to win the piece. But not a bad idea necessarily. If my queen was on a different square, maybe like b6 or something like that, then queen to c2 would be a good idea. Or even maybe like knight takes h2, king takes queen to c2. Like stuff like that is something that I definitely should have kept an eye on a bit more. I didn't really see the c2 square. So that's something that, I would want to work on, myself if I was trying to improve from this. So fortunately, though, it doesn't really work. Queen to c2, we play rook to d2. Notice how it's really important that black is making some threats, and we notice the threats, but we don't just take the knight because there's also this third threat at the same time. This bishop is attacked here. So we want to take the knight on g4 after we play the move rook to d2, because now we're hitting the queen and we're protecting the bishop while stopping the mates, and then we'll take the knight next move. So black ended up playing queen takes b3. If black had played something like I didn't really look at this during the game necessarily, but maybe even bishop c7 is kind of an interesting move here. Attacking my queen, opening up the attack on the rook. I think in this case I would still take the queen. He gets my queen attacking the rook. I'd probably move the rook away. They move the knight. I'd take another pawn. Okay, I wouldn't be up a piece here, but I'd be up a pawn with the bishop pair. So maybe this is actually the way black should have done things rather than losing a piece. But black is still in a pretty rough position, I'd say. So in the game, though, they lose the piece. And then we go ahead and just trade the bishops on d6 and b2. Because, again, we're ahead material, so trading is the way to go. Take another pawn. Now we play queen to b4, offering a trade. Black trades, which is, makes my life easier, but I don't really know if there was, too much better options. Even if they keep the queen on the board, I'd probably still play something just like rook takes e4, and we're still up a pawn, up a piece with a much better position. So black traded, and then we just take the pawn, push the b pawn, trade the rooks, and black ended up resigning here. They're just down a piece, they're down a pawn, and the b pawn is going to push down the board pretty soon. So anyways, though, that's it for this first game here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it and benefited from it. I would say the main topics we kind of focused on throughout this one were planning in the middle game with an opponent who's playing a little bit passive. They don't really have a clear plan of their own. We want to try to gain space, especially if they're not playing e5 and gaining space. We want to try to gain space ourselves with a move like e4 or trying to put pawns in the center. Then the next step was to figure out our next plan for the middle game, the idea of improving the knight to f5. Once that's traded off, now we have the bishop pair, so then the plans for that are different. We want to try to trade pawns, use the diagonals that the bishops are aimed on to attack those c6 and e5 pawns. And then as the game went along, we used a little bit of a positional combination in order to trade more pawns, open the position up, and then black ended up messing up with the queen to c2 move. If black had instead retreated the knight, maybe back to f6. I do think at this point I would have probably taken the pawn on e5 due to this pin. Black would still be losing material, but at least black's not losing a piece, and but we're definitely in a better position as white still. So anyways, though, once again, that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll be back with another video very soon with the next game in this kind of series. Trying to get the rating, it started off at 1538. Now it's 1618 here. We're going to see, how many games it takes. I'm going to try to not, like I said earlier, I'm going to try not to rush it and just, win 100 points every game. I'm going to try to, play games that the opponent is, maybe not, maybe a bigger difference in rating so that I don't gain as many points as if I win the game. But even worst case, I might play some unrated games along the way. That way there's just, more games that you guys can benefit from within that kind of rating category that we're playing against. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. So that's it for me. I'll see you guys in the next video, and have a good day. Bye-bye.